You've been saving for 6 years. Your net worth crawled from 0 to 20,000, then slowly to 50. Every dollar felt earned by hand, one paycheck dragged up a hill at a time. Then, without warning, something changes. The next 50,000 shows up in half the time. You didn't get a raise. You didn't start a side hustle. You didn't work any harder than the year before. Something else took over. That something is compounding, and it doesn't grow in a straight line. It grows in leaps. Most people think building wealth is a steady climb, a little more every year, forever. It isn't. It's flat for a long time, and then it explodes. And it explodes at 3 specific points, not randomly, but because of how math and psychology collide inside your bank account. Once you know where those points are, the wait stops feeling pointless. You can actually see the moment coming. Let's start with the first tipping point, because it's the one almost everyone underestimates. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner, once said the first $100,000 is a bitch. He wasn't being dramatic. He was describing a mathematical reality. Below $100,000, your net worth is built almost entirely by your own labor. If the market returns 7% in a year, and you have $10,000 invested, that's $700. You could earn more than that working a single weekend of overtime. At this stage, compounding is barely a rounding error. Your salary is doing all the heavy lifting, and it feels like it, because it is. But once you cross the $100,000 mark, the math quietly flips. 7% of $100,000 is $7,000 a year without you touching a single extra hour. That's not a rounding error anymore. That's a bonus that shows up whether you notice it or not. This is the first tipping point, the moment your money starts contributing as much as, or more than, a meaningful chunk of your own effort. Munger's point wasn't that the first 100,000 is impossible. It's that it's the only stretch where you're doing this completely alone, with no help from compounding. Every dollar after that has reinforcements. Here's the part that surprises people. Getting from 0 to $100,000 can take 5, 6, 7 years for the average saver. Getting from 100,000 to 200,000, assuming the same saving rate and average market returns, takes noticeably less time. Not because you changed anything, because the snowball is now large enough to roll downhill on its own weight. This is where the emotional trap begins. People give up right before the machine starts doing the work for them. Because the first stretch is the slowest, most discouraging part of the entire journey. Now let's talk about the second tipping point. And this is the one that changes how people think about their jobs. Fidelity Investments, which manages one of the largest pools of retirement accounts in the country, publishes quarterly data on what it calls its 401k millionaires. Everyday workers, not executives, who cross 7 figures in their retirement accounts. Fidelity's own research has repeatedly found something counterintuitive. Most of these people didn't dramatically increase how much they contributed in their final years before hitting the milestone. The growth accelerated because of market returns, compounding on a large base, not because they suddenly started saving harder. In other words, the account did more work in its last few years than the person did. That pattern tends to show up meaningfully somewhere in the $500,000 to $600,000 range for a typical long-term investor, depending on the market environment. At that size, average market growth in a single good year can rival an entire year's take-home pay for a lot of households. Think about what that actually means. You can go to work, put in your hours, collect your paycheck, and your portfolio, sitting quietly in the background, can add a comparable amount without you lifting a finger. This is the second tipping point. The moment your money starts earning close to what you earn. It's not that your job stops mattering. It's that it stops being the only engine in the car. This is also where behavioral finance catches up with the math. Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who won a Nobel Prize for his work on decision-making, showed through what he called prospect theory that people feel the pain of losing money roughly twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining the same amount. That means, once your portfolio is large enough to swing by real money in either direction, the emotional experience of investing changes completely. A 10% drop on $10,000 is uncomfortable. A 10% drop on $500,000 can feel like losing a car in a single afternoon, even though the percentage is identical. This is exactly why so many people sell out of the market right as their money is finally strong enough to carry them. The size that makes compounding powerful is the same size that makes the drops feel unbearable. Which brings us to the third tipping point, the one where the entire relationship between you and your money quietly reverses. Thomas Stanley, the researcher behind The Millionaire Next Door, spent decades studying how self-made millionaires actually built their wealth. His findings consistently showed that most of them weren't high-income earners living lavishly. They were ordinary earners who lived below their means and let time do the multiplying. Stanley's research pointed to something specific. Past a certain asset threshold, often somewhere around $1 to $2 million for a household, with a normal savings rate, the annual growth from the portfolio itself starts to consistently outpace what the person could realistically add from their salary in a year, even with aggressive saving. At that point, you're no longer the main character in your own wealth story. Your money is. Adding another $20,000 of savings in a year that the market grows your portfolio by $100,000 doesn't move the outcome much. That's not a reason to stop saving. The habit still matters, especially in down years. But it does mean your relationship with money fundamentally changes. Early on, you're the engine. In the middle, you and your money share the load. Past this third tipping point, your money becomes the engine, and you become the mechanic, mostly just keeping the machine from breaking. Morgan Housel, in his book, The Psychology of Money, described this shift with a simple observation. Compounding only works if you give it years, not moments of brilliance. He points out that Warren Buffett's fortune isn't mostly a story about being a better stock picker than everyone else. It's a story about starting as a teenager and still investing in his 90s. Buffett made the vast majority of his net worth after his 50th birthday, not because his skill suddenly improved, but because the base he'd built for decades had finally grown large enough to make even ordinary returns look extraordinary. Let's walk through what this actually looks like for someone who isn't a billionaire investor, just a regular saver, putting away a consistent amount every month. At an average market return, in the early years, say from $0 to $50,000, almost the entire balance comes from deposits. The market barely contributes anything, because there isn't much money for it to act on yet. That's the boulder up the hill phase, and it can easily eat up the first 5 or 6 years of saving. Then somewhere past the $100,000 mark, the account starts doing something it never did before, growing in years where nothing was added at all. A flat year of saving can still end with a higher balance than it started, purely from market movement. By the time that same saver reaches $500,000, a single strong year in the market can add more than an entire year of contributions, even aggressive ones. And by the time the portfolio crosses $1 to $2 million, the annual swing, up or down, can be larger than most people's entire salary. The deposits haven't disappeared. They still matter, especially in years the market falls. But they've been quietly demoted from lead actor to supporting cast. This is also where the crash of 2008 becomes a useful reference point. Investors who had built substantial portfolios before the financial crisis watched them fall by a third or more in a matter of months. The ones who kept contributing through the downturn, buying at lower prices without realizing it, were the ones whose portfolios recovered fastest and grew hardest once markets turned. Because compounding rewards people who stay in the game through the ugly stretch, not just the pleasant one. The size that makes a crash terrifying is the exact same size that makes the recovery so powerful. So, why does none of this feel true while you're living through it? Because the first tipping point is buried under years of slow, invisible progress, and by the time the second and third tipping points arrive, growth feels normal, almost boring, because you've adjusted to it. Nobody throws a party when their portfolio gains more in a quarter than their annual raise. They just refresh the app, feel a flicker of surprise, and move on with their day. Here's the mirror. If you're still in that first stretch, the slow, grinding climb toward $100,000, you are doing the hardest part of the entire process, and you're doing it with the least help. That's not failure. That's the one phase where effort matters more than anything else you'll ever do with money. If you're somewhere past that, watching your portfolio swing by amounts that used to represent months of work, that discomfort you feel isn't a sign something's wrong. It's the exact symptom Kahneman described: showing up right on schedule, at the exact size where it's supposed to. You checked your bank account, expecting the same slow crawl you'd gotten used to for years. But the number wasn't lower than you expected this time. It was higher, and it got there without a single extra hour of work. That's not luck. That's the machine, finally running on its own.